On the night I finally received the offer letter that was supposed to launch the rest of my life, the letter that would carry me across an ocean to a brand new beginning in London, my mother did not knock on my door to congratulate me. Instead, she stormed into my room, snatched my passport off my desk, and tore it into pieces in front of my face while screaming that I had no right to abandon this family. She honestly believed that by destroying that little blue book, she could trap me forever, because without me, there would be no one left to pay my brother bills. She thought that in that moment of shock and panic, I would crumble and stay. But what I did to my family in the weeks that followed, they never saw coming. The truth behind my story is brutal. But before I begin, please drop your location and your local time in the comments below. I truly want to see where in the world my voice is reaching tonight, and from how many different places you are all joining me in this fight for what is right. My name is Olivia. I am a 31-year-old software engineer living and working in the cold, fast-moving city of Chicago. For as long as I can remember, I believed that blood was thicker than water, and that family was something you carried on your back no matter how heavy it became, even if it meant sacrificing your own dreams, your own freedom, and your own future. I grew up in a house where my worth was measured by one single thing: the size of the check I could write. If I succeeded, it was never a reason to celebrate. It was simply seen as a larger resource for the family to spend. Building a career in technology in a major American city demands everything you have. My days began before the sun came up and rarely ended before 9 at night. While the other engineers on my team spent their weekends traveling, dating, or building lives of their own, my weekends were swallowed by extra projects and by the endless arithmetic of keeping an entire household afloat. I was the dependable daughter. I was the responsible sister. I was the one everybody called the moment something went wrong, because they all knew that I would fix it, no matter what it cost me. When you spend your entire life being the financial and emotional engine for a whole family, you slowly learn to ignore your own exhaustion. You begin to believe that the constant tiredness, the skipped meals, and the deep loneliness are simply the price of being a good person. I told myself that if I just worked a little harder, if I just earned a little more, then one day my parents would finally look at me with the love and the respect that I was starving for. But that kind of hope is a fragile thing, and mine was about to be shattered by the very people I was killing myself to support. For 6 long years, I was the only thing standing between my family and total collapse. I was not simply helping out with a few groceries here and there. I was carrying the full weight of their entire existence on my shoulders. Every single month, the mortgage on my parents' house in the suburbs came directly out of my bank account. I paid for the heat, the water, the internet, and the food that filled their refrigerator. But the heaviest weight I carried was never the house. It was my younger brother, Lucas. Lucas is 27 years old, and he is the undisputed golden child of our family. He is a smooth-talking, deeply arrogant young man who has never held a real job for more than a few weeks at a time. From the moment he became an adult, my parents decided that Lucas was a genius, a special kind of person who was simply too brilliant for ordinary work. Every time he quit a job, or got fired, or walked out because someone dared to correct him, my mother Carol and my father Frank would rush to comfort him. They told him that his big break was always just around the corner, that the world simply did not understand his talent, that a young man so gifted should never have to lower himself to common labor. If a manager criticized his work, Carol would insist they were jealous of his potential. If he failed to show up for a shift, Frank would blame the company for being toxic and unfair. They shielded him from every single consequence of his laziness, and in doing so, they raised a grown man who truly believed that the world owed him an easy and luxurious life. And the person paying for that life, of course, was always me. So while Lucas slept until the afternoon, played video games until sunrise, and spent money he had never earned, I was grinding myself into the ground at my company. I wrote code until my eyes burned. I took on the projects no one else wanted. I answered emails at midnight, and I solved emergencies at dawn. My social life slowly faded into nothing. When friends invited me out, I usually said no, because the money in my account was already promised to Lucas' car payments, to my parents' bills, and to the constant emergencies that always seemed to find my family. There were nights I will never forget. I remember staying at the office until 2 in the morning to fix a problem that no one else could solve, and then driving home in the empty dark to a message from my mother asking when the next payment was coming. I remember a kind coworker named Priya, the only person who ever seemed to truly notice me, gently asking one afternoon why a woman who earned what I earned, still wore the same worn coat year after year, still drove a car that sounded like it might fall apart at any moment. I did not have an answer for her. The truth was too humiliating to say out loud. The truth was that every extra dollar I earned vanished into a family that had never once said thank you, and I had taught myself not to expect anything different. I remember one summer, 2 years before the offer arrived, when Lucas crashed the car I had paid for and demanded that I buy him a newer and nicer one because he could not be seen driving something damaged. My mother called me, not to ask if I could help, but to inform me that I would help, that a good sister does not let her brother feel embarrassed. I bought the car. I told myself it was love. The truth was that I was simply afraid of what would happen if I ever said no. That fear had ruled my entire life, and I did not even know it yet. While Carol, Frank, and Lucas lived in comfort off the back of my labor, I was strict and careful with my own life. I did not buy nice clothes. I did not take vacations. I lived in a small apartment with a leaky window and a heater that barely worked. I drove an old car that rattled at every stoplight, and I packed the same plain lunch every day to save a few dollars. And through all of that discipline, through all of those long and lonely years, I held on to one quiet, private dream that kept me moving forward when I wanted to give up. I dreamed of leaving, not in anger, not at first, but simply of building a life that belonged to me. I wanted to wake up one day in a place where no one knew me as the family bank, where I could spend a paycheck on myself without guilt, where my future was mine to design. Over those 6 years, through sheer willpower and a level of sacrifice that bordered on punishing, I quietly saved exactly $150,000. That money was sacred to me. It was my escape, my parachute, the foundation of every dream I had ever been too tired to chase. My family did not know this money existed. I kept the account hidden, the statements electronic, locked behind a private email, and a second layer of security that only I could open. I knew with complete certainty that if they ever learned about my savings, they would find a way to guilt me, pressure me, or shame me into emptying it for Lucas. So I stayed silent, and I kept paying their bills, and I told myself that as long as the money kept flowing, they would leave my secret alone. What I refused to understand for far too long was that to them, I had never really been a daughter or a sister. I was a machine that produced money. And the moment that machine tried to walk out the door, they were fully prepared to smash it apart. Everything changed on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk when an email arrived from a recruiter at the London office of a large technology company. They had seen my work. They wanted to interview me for a senior position in the United Kingdom, a role that would double my salary, cover my relocation, and place me on a path I had only ever dreamed about. My hands were shaking as I read it. For 3 weeks, I went through interview after interview, late at night because of the time difference, hiding it all from my family. During those 3 weeks of interviews, I lived a strange double life. By day, I sat in meetings and wrote code and paid my family bills as I always had. And by night, I logged into video calls with people in London who treated me like a serious professional, like someone with a future, like someone whose talent was worth crossing an ocean for. I did not tell a single member of my family because I knew, somewhere deep down, that they would not be happy for me. I had learned long ago that my good news always became their problem, that every door I opened for myself was treated as a door I was slamming in their faces. So I kept my hope locked away in my chest where they could not reach it, and I worked harder on those interviews than I had ever worked on anything in my life. And then, on that unforgettable evening, The final email arrived. I had been offered the job. They wanted me in London in 2 months. I sat alone in my dim apartment and I cried. But for the first time in years, they were not tears of exhaustion. They were tears of hope. This was my way out. This was the life I had bled for. I made the foolish, hopeful mistake of telling my mother the news because some small, broken part of me still wanted my family to be proud of me just once. I called Carol and told her about London, about the salary, about the chance of a lifetime. The phone went silent for a long, cold moment, and then her voice came back, and it was not warm, and it was not proud. It was sharp with fear. She asked me who was going to pay the mortgage if I moved across the ocean. She asked me who was going to cover Lucas' car payments and his credit cards. She told me that I was being selfish, that I was thinking only of myself, that I was abandoning the people who had raised me. I tried to explain that I would still help, that I simply wanted a life of my own, that I had earned this chance. But she would not hear a single word of it. She hung up the phone, and I sat in the silence, the joy slowly draining out of me, replaced by a familiar and sickening dread. The next evening, my parents arrived at my apartment without warning, and Lucas was right behind them. My mother walked in with a face like a storm. She told me that the family had discussed it and that I was not going to London. She said that my place was here, that my duty was here, that no daughter of hers would run off to another country while her own brother struggled. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, nodding along. Lucas leaned against the wall and smirked, as if my entire future were a small inconvenience to him, a problem to be managed. I told them no. My voice was shaking, but it was clear. I told them that this was my life, that I had worked myself half to death for 6 years to earn this chance, and that I was going to London whether they approved or not. I told them that I loved them, but that I could not keep setting myself on fire to keep them warm. My mother's eyes went wide with disbelief, and then they narrowed into something cold and ugly. She crossed the room before I understood what was happening, snatched my passport off the desk where it sat beside my open laptop and tore it apart with a violent, crazed jerk of her hands. The little blue book ripped down the middle, and the pieces fluttered to the floor of my apartment. She screamed that I was going nowhere, that without a passport I could not run, that I would stay right here and keep paying for this family until the day I died. I dropped to my knees and begged her to stop, but it was already done. I looked toward my father, pleading with my eyes for him to step in, to be a parent for once in his life. But Frank did not move to help me. Instead, he stepped forward, placed himself between me and the door, and looked down at me with pure contempt. He told me that I had brought this on myself. He said that I had always thought I was better than this family, that my mother was right, that I was a stubborn and ungrateful girl who needed to be reminded of where I belonged. Lucas laughed from the corner of the room and told me to stop being so dramatic, that it was only a passport, that I could always stay where I was useful. My mother reached down, grabbed my laptop, and raised it over her head, ready to smash the one tool that held my entire career, my offer letter, and the proof of the life I was trying to build. But she never got the chance. What my parents did not realize, in their arrogant and greedy frenzy, was that I had stopped being the helpless girl they remembered. The moment they had begun shouting, the moment my mother first reached for my passport, I had quietly pressed the record button on my phone, which sat face up on the kitchen counter. Every threat, every scream, every cruel word from my father, all of it was captured, and there was something else they did not know. My passport was simply a book that could be replaced. My career, my offer, and my savings were all far beyond their reach. I stood up slowly, and I told them to get out of my apartment. My voice no longer shook. My mother, still holding my laptop above her head, froze at the sudden steel in my words. I told her that if she did not put my laptop down and leave immediately, I would call the police, and that I had recorded every single thing she had just done. For the first time in my life, I watched fear flicker across my mother's face. She set the laptop down on the table. My father grabbed her arm and muttered that they were leaving, that I was not worth the trouble, that I would come crawling back the moment the money ran out. They walked out of my apartment, and Lucas trailed behind them, and the door closed, and I stood alone in the quiet wreckage of my own family. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my apartment for hours, staring at the torn pieces of the passport, waiting for the old fear to rise up and pull me back into line the way it always had. I waited for the guilt, for the voice in my head that sounded exactly like my mother, telling me that a good daughter would forgive, that family was everything, that I was selfish and cold and wrong. But for the first time in my life, that voice was quiet. In its place was something I had never felt before, something steady and clear and unshakable. It was the simple, powerful certainty that I had finally seen these people for exactly who they were, and that I was never going to let them touch my life again. That night, sitting on the floor of my apartment with the torn pieces of my passport scattered around me, I made a decision that had been 6 years in the making. The blind, unconditional loyalty I had carried my whole life was officially dead. Being the selfless, accommodating daughter had nearly cost me the only chance I would ever get, and I swore to myself that my life would never again belong to them. I picked up the pieces of my passport, and I almost laughed, because they truly believed that destroying that little book could trap me. They had no idea how the modern world worked. They had no idea what was coming next. The very next morning, I began the calm and deliberate work of taking back my life. My first stop was a passport office, where I learned that a torn passport could be reported and replaced within a matter of weeks, easily in time for my move. My second stop, made from a quiet coffee shop with my laptop and a steady cup of coffee, was my online banking portal. For 6 long years, I had willingly kept a long list of automatic payments flowing out of my account and into the lives of people who had just tried to cage me. With a calm hand and a clear mind, I shut down every single one of them. I canceled the automatic mortgage payment on my parents' house. I shut off the automatic transfers that covered their heat, their water, and their internet. I closed the shared credit card that Lucas had used to fund his lifestyle for years. I removed all 3 of them from the phone plan I had been paying for since the day I got my first paycheck. And then, the most important step of all, I logged into my savings account and moved my entire $150,000 into a new account, one tied to my future life in London, an account my family could never find, never reach, and never touch. My parents had gambled everything on one belief. They believed that trapping me at home and frightening me into staying would keep their comfortable life intact. What their arrogance kept them from understanding was the simplest truth of all. They had no power over me. They had never owned my career, my talent, or my money. They had only ever owned my fear. And on that morning, in a small coffee shop in Chicago, I finally set that fear down and walked away from it forever. I want to be clear about something because I have thought about it many times since. I did not act out of cruelty. I acted out of survival. For 6 long years, I had given my family every chance to treat me with even a fraction of the care I gave them. And for 6 long years, they had chosen again and again to see me as nothing more than a source of money. The night my mother tore my future into pieces on the floor, she made her choice. And on the morning that followed, I made mine. I did not scream. I did not beg. I simply stopped pouring myself into a family that had never once held anything for me in return. I also sent one more message that morning. I forwarded the recording from my phone to the recruiter in London, not as a complaint, but because I wanted my new employer to understand why I might need extra support with my relocation, and because some part of me needed a witness who was not part of my family. The company response was immediate and kind. They assigned a relocation specialist to my case, expedited every document, and even arranged temporary housing for my arrival. For the first time in my life, an institution of strangers was treating me with more care than my own parents ever had. The collapse of my family life came quickly. Without my paycheck covering the mortgage, my parents fell behind within a single month. The bank that held the loan had no patience and no sympathy. A notice of default appeared on their door, and the slow machinery of foreclosure began to turn. My golden child brother Lucas discovered the hard way that the real world does not care about a mother praise or a father excuses. With the shared credit card canceled, his phone line shut off, and the family home slipping away beneath him, he was suddenly and completely alone for the first time in his life. The young man who had been too brilliant to work, too special to lower himself to ordinary labor, was forced to face a world that owed him absolutely nothing. He could no longer call me because I had blocked his number along with everyone else. He could no longer charge his meals to a card I paid for. With nowhere left to turn, Lucas finally did the one thing my parents had spent his entire life telling him he was too good to do. He got a job. He took a position stocking shelves on the overnight shift at a warehouse, lifting boxes until dawn for an hourly wage, and he moved into a single cramped room that he shared with two strangers in a part of the city he had always looked down on. My parents, for their part, were forced to confront a life they had never once prepared for. For years, they had lived in a comfortable house they did not pay for, surrounded by comforts they had not earned, all of it quietly funded by a daughter they treated like a servant. Now the bills arrived in their own names, and there was no one left to make them disappear. My mother, who had spent years telling everyone how proud she was of her brilliant son and how disappointed she was in her difficult daughter, suddenly had to explain to the neighbors why a notice was taped to her front door. My father, who had always crossed his arms and let my mother do the cruel work, found that his silence had cost him everything. The comfortable kingdom they had built on my back collapsed the moment I stopped holding it up. 2 months later, on a clear and cold morning, I boarded a plane at the Chicago airport with a brand new passport in my hand and $150,000 safely waiting in an account that was entirely my own. As the plane lifted off the runway and the gray sprawl of the only city I had ever known fell away beneath me, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I had carried for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I did not cry for the family I was leaving behind. I had already done all of my crying years ago, in the dark, alone. London welcomed me with open arms. My new job was everything the recruiter had promised and more. My coworkers were kind, my work was respected, and for the first time in my adult life, the money I earned belonged to me and to no one else. I used part of my savings to put a deposit on a bright, beautiful flat near the river, a place with tall windows that filled with golden light every evening. I bought myself a warm coat for the British winter, and I cried in the shop because such a small kindness toward myself had felt impossible for so many years. I made friends, I went to dinners, I traveled on the weekends, just like the people I had once envied. I built, brick by brick, the life I had always deserved. Slowly, in that city across the ocean, I began to discover who I actually was when no one was draining me dry. I learned that I liked to cook on quiet Sunday mornings. I learned that I had a sense of humor that had been buried under years of exhaustion. I learned that I was generous, but that my generosity was a gift to give freely, not a debt to be collected by force. I joined a hiking group and walked the green hills outside the city on the weekends. I sat in small cafes and read books that had nothing to do with work. For the first time in my adult life, my time and my money and my heart belonged to me, and I spent them on the life I had always been too tired and too afraid to build. My family tried to reach me, of course. Once the money stopped, the messages began. First angry, then desperate, then pleading. My mother sent long emails about loyalty and duty and the sacrifices she claimed to have made for me. My father sent short, cold demands for help. Lucas sent rambling messages, sometimes furious and sometimes crying, telling me how hard his life had become. I read a few of them, and then I stopped reading altogether. They had shown me exactly who they were on the night they tore my passport apart, and I finally chose to believe them. For a long time I waited to feel guilty. I had been taught my whole life that turning my back on family was the worst thing a person could do, and I half expected the guilt to arrive like a storm and wash all of my new happiness away. But it never came. What came instead was peace. I slept through entire nights without my phone buzzing with someone else's emergency. I spent my own money on my own life without asking permission or bracing for shame. I sat by my tall windows in the golden evening light and felt, for the very first time, that my life was actually mine. Looking back on everything I survived, I have come to understand a painful truth. Some people will only love you for as long as you can be useful to them. It took my own mother tearing my future into pieces on the floor of my apartment for me to finally see that toxic family is no different from poison, no matter how much blood you share. They thought that by destroying one small book, they could chain me to a life of endless sacrifice. What they never understood is that the prison they had built around me was made entirely of my own fear, and the moment I stopped being afraid, the walls simply fell away. Today, I live in a city across the ocean, in a home filled with light, doing work that I love, surrounded by people who treat me with respect. My savings are mine, my salary is mine, my future is mine, and for the very first time in my entire life, I wake up each morning knowing that I belong to no one but myself. I think often about the woman I used to be, the one who slept in her car in a parking lot and apologized for existing, the one who believed that love was something she had to buy in monthly installments. I wish I could reach back through the years and tell her the truth. I wish I could tell her that the people who truly love you do not keep a ledger. I wish I could tell her that walking away from people who only see your value in dollars is not a betrayal. It is the beginning of saving your own life. It took an ocean and a torn passport and the loneliest night of my life to teach me that lesson, but I have carried it with me ever since. Now that you have heard my story, I have to ask you something. Do you believe I was right to walk away from my family and let the consequences finally catch up to them? What would you have done if someone had torn your future apart right in front of your eyes? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story gave you any strength or any peace tonight, please subscribe and ring the bell so you can stand with us again tomorrow.